Okay, so this is part 2, picking up where I left off. So the word master is Kyrios in Greek. And Kairos refers to Kairos, which means opportune time. We are all obligated to chronological time, which is our clock. We have to be at work at 9, we have to eat lunch at 12, we have to pick up our kids at 2. This is chronological time. It's a fact that we're limited to this body. However, we've all heard of divine timing, which is like God's timing. And that's what master and Kairos refers to. Kairos is Chiron, the master key. You can see the symbol here. Represents the rainbow bridge. Well, I'll explain in a moment. An opportune time. The opportune time to do our spiritual work, which I'll explain, and dethrone our parents, is actually between 48 to 52 years old. However, I'm talking about beyond 52 as well. It's not that we don't get a chance to do work beyond 52 years old. But that's when we get to return home, dethrone our parents, and show up as the adult in life. Cortisol interferes with the executive functions of the prefrontal cortex, aka adulting. It's only when we dethrone our parents, when we say we're not going to show up as child anymore in this fight or flight freeze response, that we're actually adulting and showing up with a clear mind that obviously cortisol blocks, as I mentioned before. So what does the word master mean in religion and philosophy? We see master in reference to Jesus quite a bit. In Luke 8:24, the disciples wake up Jesus saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown," when they're on the boat. And Jesus redirects the winds and calms the storm. And the word master in terms of Jesus has been used in the Bible a lot. Next is Yahweh. This is the tetragrammaton of the Jews. And to the right, I have a picture here of Yahweh and the breath, or the lungs. And it's when we actually breathe, get out of fight or flight, that we can make a clear decision as to what our next moves are. It's said that God lives between the inhale and the exhale. In my model, I use the pause, which is the teenager, to then decide if I want to stay in child or go into the adult steps. So this idea of taking a breath, shifting out of fight or flight, and moving into the parasympathetic nervous system, then when we can make a decision where we're calm and more adult. The Ankh is a symbol from Egypt mythology, Egyptian tarot, and it's considered the master key. The pharaohs or the gods and goddesses that hold the Ankh are believed to hold the mastery, self-mastery, or the knowledge. The breath, again, controls the autonomic nervous system and gets you out of fight or flight. And in yoga, pranayama, one of the limbs of yoga, is believed to expand your life. If you look at certain animals, depending on how deep they breathe or how shallow they breathe, you can look at lifetime. And it's said in the Yoga Sutras that there's a certain amount of breaths that everybody is given upon birth. And if you can master your breath, then you can actually stretch out, let's say, those 10,000 breaths and live a longer lifetime. So if you can control your breath, if you can show up like an adult, if you're not constantly in stress and fight or flight, and we do know from a biological standpoint that obviously living in fight or flight or in the stress response does shorten our life. We can have heart attacks and all of the other biological symptoms. This is written in the spiritual literature as well. So let's talk about mythology and symbology. So first, let's start with Hercules and the Nemean lion. Hercules is the warrior. Hercules was given 12 labors where he had to defeat or bring back gifts to Hera. And the one that is represented with the Nemean lion, if you've ever seen the movie with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, you can see him defeating the Nemean lion, also in the Herculean Disney version as well. This is one of the labors of Hercules. So first the lion, the quintessential fight or flight response is a lion is chasing me, and your body goes into fight or flight so that the lion doesn't chase you. So we hear that. The lion is also representative of the sign Leo, and the sign Leo has to do with narcissism, has to do with ego. So that's one of the things that we're sort of defeating when we confront our lion. The pituitary is the cave. In the Alice Bailey myths of Hercules and defeating the Nemean lion, she speaks of Hercules going into a cave to defeat the lion. They're playing cat and mouse. And finally he gets smart and he puts a door, a brick wall, so the lion cannot escape him. This happened in a cave. Remember, all Hermetic teachings happen in a cave. Our Dark Night of the Soul, our Negredo in alchemy, in the West in shamanism, is all representative of a cave, of doing the bad buckets, of the inner wisdom, of confronting your fears, confronting who you really are. Again, your emotions that are ruling and dictating your life from a child perspective. In the upper right-hand corner, I have a picture of Chiron. Chiron in Greek mythology is the ferryman. He took the dead souls through the river Styx, and you had to pay him. So when we go into the underworld, when we confront our fears, when we confront our true selves, and we really get to know, we sort of give the gods, we give the gods some sort of offering, and it's symbolic of something in ourselves has to die in order to be reborn. Chiron is noted as the key. It's this symbol here. I'll go in depth, and also known as the rainbow bridge. In astronomy, in between the constellation of Capricorn and Saturn here, and Aquarius, Uranus, there is Chiron, the rainbow bridge. Between 28 to 30 years old, we have our first sort of cycle of completion, where we're given our karmic sort of cross to bear. We might have kids, we might have a mortgage, we might have a professional responsibility, and that is a limitation. And I told you about the skinny cows. Every 7 years, we're confronted with those skinny cows. That has to do with the 28 to 30-year-old cycle. At 40 to 42, we have our next cycle, psychological cycle, which is our liberation. This might be where we start our spiritual journey. We liberate ourselves of limiting thoughts, of sexual liberation. And at 42, we have our Chiron. 48 to 52, we have our Chiron. That's when Chiron comes full circle. And it is the bridge between this destiny or karma, or sort of repeating life cycles, and our liberation, which is considered moksha, out of the body. But we have to heal and understand our abandoned child, our inner wound, our deepest wound, our subconscious wound, in order to stop, so to speak, the cycle of samsara, which is the cycle back and forth into the body. And next I have the Capricorn symbol. This symbol is symbolic. Do not get me wrong. It's not that Capricorns are Christ. It is represented as Christ consciousness. Jesus was actually a Leo, so talk about the lion. And it was when he killed off that ego, so to speak, we're talking about representation of us, that he becomes what we all long for, which is the Christ consciousness. This is the high level of consciousness. And this symbol is drawn in many, many ways. Everybody always is like, how do you draw the Capricorn symbol? And that's intentional. We are not supposed to see the face of God. Moses couldn't see the face of God. We are not supposed to be able to draw the Christ consciousness. We are not privy to that information about what God is or what God looks like. So this brings me to the 7th chakra. The 7th chakra, is now the pituitary. The 6th chakra was the pineal gland. So the 7th chakra connects energetically with the 1st chakra. The 1st chakra is the element of earth. It's the one I told you was limited by the tribe, by the values, by the judgments. Everything you were given in childhood happens in that 1st chakra. It is connected to the seventh chakra. The first and the seventh are connected. It is considered the crown chakra or the Saraswara chakra, the bridge to the cosmos. This is your chakra of transcendence. This is the one that is past the veil of illusion or veil of Maya that we talked about last week. This represents transcendence and the formless God. Everybody has a form of what they see God. It's Mother, Father, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Shiva, whomever you pray to. It could be your money. Everybody has a God here at the sixth chakra. But can you transcend that? Can you transcend your dogma, your values, just momentarily? Because then we have to come right back and do it all over again to see the reality of who you are, that you're really just the divine, and that all of this story that you're attached to, all of this wound that you're attached to is just nonsense to keep you in this cycle of coming back into a body form. And my question to you is, do you think you can transcend your primordial wound? I can give you some information and you'll have to see if you can do the work, and that's your own choice. So let me take you back to the mythology of Chiron. Chiron is a product of the father Kronos, represented here as a centaur, and his mother, an ocean nymph named Philyra. Kronos, or Saturn, as we know, was dethroned, and he raped Philyra. Midway through the sexual act, he turned into a horse because his wife Rhea was looking for him and she caught him. And so he was trying to disguise himself. So it brings up a couple questions. Who were your parents pretending to be, perhaps, when they conceived you? What mask did they put on? Did they really know themselves? And oftentimes, you know, we have a fantasy around the sexual act when we meet someone and we really don't know who we're with. So this disguise is the low level of consciousness. This disguise becomes indeed the mask that you wear. So Philyra, of course, left in shame. There's shame in our wound. There's shame in being abandoned. There's shame in being kicked out of the family or being told, put that away. We don't approve of your behavior. She wasn't prepared to cope. We as children do not have proper coping. So we drink, we eat, we smoke, we have sex, we yell, we're angry. And this represents this animalistic part of us that shows up as fight or flight because we don't have good coping skills. She considered his form, the fact that Chiron was born centaur, half animal, half human, to be a reminder of her disgrace, half horse, half human. In my first book, I talk about finding your divinity through your humanity. We are human form, but yet we have a divine spark. This is what Jesus came to teach us. So if we're able, with our limitation, with our wound, with our desires of the flesh, to find this humanity and our divinity, then we can heal this wound of Chiron. But she was disgusted by the form. Remember, this is metaphorical for us being kicked out of Eden, kicked out of the universal consciousness, kicked out of the heavens, kicked out of the universal womb. It is our form represented by Saturn or Cronus, limitation, the body, that we die, that we actually hate. I taught you about the grief cycle, and that the grief cycle is actually when we incarnate as a human being. She abandoned the child in a cave. Every one of us in this wounded child, and I'm going to give you Carolyn Mace's sort of variance on this, in essence feel abandoned. Whether or not your parents were great or actually did abandon you, this is the key essence of Chiron in the chart and in your psyche and of your subconscious wound. She abandoned him in a cave, in secret, in private. We suffer our wound in secret and in private. And it is only in secret and in private when we confront ourselves and our bad buckets and who we really are and what we really come from, that we can actually heal. She begged the gods to release her from a lifetime of humiliation. It is only when you heal that primordial wound that you can stop the cycle of samsara, which is incarnating and reincarnating and reincarnating if you believe in reincarnation. the gods adopted him and made him master teacher of all the gods' children. This is very important because we feel that we're adopted, that we don't belong to the family. And we try to find spirit or God or validation needs or another person or a partner so they can adopt us and tell us that we're lovable and worthy. Chiron was indeed the master of all the gods' children. And in a moment, I'm going to show you a clip from Percy Jackson, but that's a really great video where Pierce Brosnan plays Chiron, and they're on an island with all of the gods' children, and he is there to teach them everything about everything. Once we actually own our Chiron, once we own our abandonment, once we own our issue, once we own that we're limited to the flesh, once we own that we're divine and human all in one, then we become the mastery of self-mastery or equanimity, or the 48 to 52. So in the movie Percy Jackson, and I'll show you a clip in a moment, there is an island, and it's symbolic that it's an island. It's separate from our Chiron. Our wound keeps us separate, or we think keeps us separate from everybody else, as if we're the only ones that have the issue. And Chiron is the master. He is the most evolved centaur. This is super important. In mythology, centaurs are rapists and alcoholics. Remember what I said about alcohol increasing cortisol. When we go to poor coping, when we're in child, when we're not an elevated centaur, when we're working from the same low level consciousness as our parents, we're actually in that fight or flight or child mode. It is only when we show up as Chiron, the evolved centaur, the one that's rational and logical and spiritual and understands that he holds the key to healing in self, that we actually show up as adult or high-level consciousness. Hercules. Hercules in the Disney version is always with a little guy named Phil, who is also a centaur, played by Danny DeVito. This is an important part of the Chiron mythology. And Chiron is always with, Hercules is always with Chiron as his teacher. Actually, Chiron's favorite student was Hercules. On our chart, the relationship between your Chiron and your Mars will tell you about your fight or flight freeze response, the way that you're the warrior in this world to try to heal your wound. This is how you show up to try to disguise that. In the myth, Chiron was accidentally hit with an arrow that had the poison blood of the Hydra that could never heal. It's a wound that never heals. So there goes to ask if we can ever heal this wound. I don't believe so, but we can learn to master ourselves in spite of having this wound. So Chiron is hit with the arrow. He's got a gash in his thigh, and he goes around the world for 48 to 52 years, but